Hello and welcome to our 12th edition of FSI Fridays. I'm Edwin, live in Boston, joined by Johansson in Charlotte. Hey Johansson, happy Friday. I'm thrilled we're kicking off Security September. What's in store for us today?
Happy Friday, Edwin. Regulatory and security management are always top of mind for our financial services customers. First, we'll briefly talk about the ever-changing threat landscape. Next, we'll discuss how cloud and the shared responsibility can be very helpful and advantageous in terms of keeping up with all the changes and ensuring adherence to compliance and creating security policies. Demos are always a fun way to see how things come together, walking through some key components. Then we'll wrap up with some Q&A today on FSI Fridays.
You said it, Johansson. So looking forward to having some fun with this one. For those of you watching live or on YouTube, as a quick reminder, we'll spend 30 minutes or so on today's topic. We'll leave the last 10 to 15 minutes to address any burning questions. So please use the Q&A window and we'll monitor for questions during the presentation. If you're watching the recording, feel free to use the comments below to ask your questions. Let's go ahead and get started and meet the presenter for today. We are joined by one of my favorite security experts in the field, Heath Lawson. So Heath, I've seen you present internally and with customers, and we're always learning so much interacting with you. Can you let the audience know what you're up to at Microsoft these days?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Edwin. And first off, thanks for having me on the show today. I totally appreciate the opportunity to to share some great information with our customers. So my role at Microsoft is actually really cool. I'm what we call an enterprise security executive, and my job is to help our customers as they navigate their own journeys across our clouds through their digital transformation. So I get to spend time both on the modern work side of the house, as we know it, Office 365 and a lot of the great technologies that are there, but then equally as important, I get to spend time talking about our security and compliance strategy as it relates to Azure and all the great workloads and applications that folks are putting out there. So it's a really fun role for me.
That's awesome. Being a security expert, unfortunately, I hear you didn't have secure footing last night while fishing.
Yeah. The funny story. I'm an avid fly fisherman. I was out last night checking out some new waters, and some days are great days, some days not so great. I totally lost my footing last night. Took a face plant, splashed cold water across the face. I was wearing a mask, so there's a brief moment of suffocation, it felt like. And one thought that popped through is, oh my gosh, I don't know if I'm going to make it to the show tomorrow. Thankfully, everything's good. I'm here. I'm well. I'm a little banged up, but super excited to chat about security and compliance in Azure today.
Well, I'm glad that's not your day job, Heath. So let's get right into it. So can you tell us about the security and compliance landscape today and how digital transformation is playing a big role here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a couple of really big themes that are happening. I mean, first and foremost, the cloud is here. Like, whether we like it or not, however we approach it, the cloud is here. It's driving digital transformation in new and innovative ways. We've seen this day in and day out, especially through COVID. The cloud is a huge enabler for business and a key component in digital transformation. Most importantly probably is it allows us to scale. Like it allows us to scale our business processes in ways that we've never imagined. Now there's kind of another side to that, right? And that's, as we talk about the cloud and all the great benefits that it comes with it, it also introduces some pretty common challenges when we think about it from a regulatory or even a security lens. And, I'm pretty fortunate. I spend a lot of time talking with customers. I've got about 40 customers that I spend a lot of time with, chatting through their challenges, their concerns, helping them move forward. And I've picked up a couple of kind of key themes and a couple of key points. I'd say the first is that the workloads are changing. At its core, what this really means is that the way we've approached some of these regulatory concerns, some of these compliance concerns, some of these security risks, it's not necessarily that it's the same. And so we have to foundationally understand that what we've done in the past doesn't necessarily mean it's how we have to do it in the future. So these workloads are fundamentally changing, sometimes for the better. We could also take another angle to that, which is that many of the workloads we're looking to consume in the cloud, these don't carry the baggage of 10, 15, 20 years of as a technology. They were built for a modern era, and with that, they get a lot of the modern, security controls, compliance controls that wrap around them. Other factors that we hear pretty often, the threat landscape is evolving at an incredible pace, unfortunately. And if we look at the adversaries that are out there, they're increasing in terms of their skill and their tactics, and really focusing in on some key areas. Obviously, highly regulated customers are always kind of at the tip of that spear, and we don't have to look too far beyond the news each week to kind of get a good feel for what that looks like. And then, really the last piece I think is kind of the people element. Kind of a perennial topic in security when we talk about security, is that by many measures, there's a talent shortage out there. There's only so many people that can keep up. And when we think about, kind of the bottomless scale, the endless scale of the cloud, we don't necessarily have that in our people, right? We need more people. We need more folks helping keep us secure. So we have to think about it in those ways.
Yeah, I think for our financial services customers, and all those things are very relevant. Could you talk a little bit more about why these things are more important for them, as our primary audience here?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think if you take all those and you kind of look at the nexus of where all of those overlap, really what it comes down to is it creates a really complex operating environment especially for our regulated customers. They have to navigate these waters, and kind of evaluate each of these priorities against each other. And then I think one of the things that I hear pretty often is I get the question, hey, I don't want to move to the cloud because of security. I don't feel comfortable moving my workloads to the cloud, and I think it's pretty important to level set that it's not necessarily that we have to do things the way we've always done things in the past. What I've done in my four walls of my data center doesn't necessarily have to be the way I do things going forward. Rather, it's an opportunity for us to re-envision what some of these controls and capabilities can look like. It's not that it's the same, it's just different, and we need to accept that. So yeah.
You bring up a good point. I mean, speaking of different, some of it now revolves around a shared responsibility model. We know our FSI customers have deployed solutions in private data centers, but now with the shift to cloud, where does that responsibility lay?
Yeah. So this is always an interesting topic, and it's a topic that it always comes up, and as it should. We talk a lot about shared responsibility and kind of what that means for customers. Really, at the end of the day, if we think back, even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when a lot of folks were literally operating every service they used out of the four walls of their data center, it was really they and only they had complete control over many of the concerns and risk mitigations they might have in place. As we shift to the cloud, and this chart is I bet I use this 10, 15 times a week in conversations. This chart here is really great because it helps us kind of show that as we move to the cloud, and depending on the way we consume the service, there's a varying level of responsibility versus the cloud service provider. And in our case, obviously that's Microsoft. Whereas we look at a lot of the services we may use, some of those for something simple, let's take IaaS as an example, infrastructure as a service, think VMs. In a historical world, you'd be responsible for making sure that, hey, the data center is in a safe place. There's backup power and fuel and all of those, kind of key elements that you need to run a data center. But as we shift to the cloud, there's a shift in that responsibility. Microsoft operates the data center, and so we have to make sure that we're able to attest to those capabilities, those requirements are met. And so it gets really tricky for customers. I think it adds to some of the navigation struggles that are out there, I think, for folks, because really, not only do we now have to worry about, hey, these new cloud services, maybe new ways of solving problems, but I may have to also look at it through the lens of, well, who's responsible for what? How do I actually know what is where and who's doing what in this view of the world? So this is kind of a foundational piece, and we have a lot of great stuff out there that helps folks with it. But it is definitely one of those that I'd say, I think most customers have been down this path and have a decent understanding here. But it's still a topic that we come back to time and time again. And I think a lot of customers, a lot of our customers anyways, I should say, often struggle with this as they evaluate new workloads, et cetera.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We have very similar conversations all the time. It is a concern, but I know we have a good story to help alleviate it. So, I mean, it really does sound like in this world, Microsoft has a hand to play alongside our customers, right? That must make it tough for customers to understand where they stand at any given time.
Yeah, you're spot on, and more importantly, I mean, I absolutely think it is 100%. It's definitely a different way of looking at the risks like present to an organization, and kind of understanding mitigations that may be in place. But more holistically, I think now more than ever, it requires a holistic view of your digital estate. And that's an area that has always been a challenge in IT and security. But I think the cloud is an enabler in many ways. Might be a little bit of foreshadowing there. But to kind of expand on that, one of the other angles that we see is not just kind of the centralized functions that take care of these, but there's a very real struggle out there between, I think, organizations enabling their folks to go out and be super productive, innovate and drive that digital transformation, while at the same time making sure that they're not exposing the company to additional risk, misconfiguring things, leaving storage accounts open, etc. And so we really have kind of a responsibility, I think, all of us, and that shared responsibility, if you will, to start these people off on the right foot. Make sure we've got some strong controls in place that can help do that. And then, I think the other thing that we can do is bring a lot of the contextual awareness around these workloads as they're deployed. And I think that context is super key. I think that's really kind of the magic sauce, if you will, as we talk a lot about understanding your digital estate. It's not necessarily just I have a VM sitting here, but it's how is that VM configured? What is it exposed to? What is it doing for me? Taking all those factors into account, that context allows us to make some better decisions and hopefully keep us safer at the end of the day.
Thanks for that, Heath. I think the contextual awareness piece sounds like a real game changer. As in the past, it's almost a manual process to find ways to even tie these pieces together. And, in the shared responsibility model and the way regulations are changing every single day, it's almost tough for our customers to kind of keep up with all of this. So can you give us some examples of what would provide this contextual awareness for our customers? I know we've got some capabilities in Azure. I'd love to hear your perspectives on them.
Yeah, totally. So probably I would say one of the first ones that a lot of folks don't know about, and it's kind of like the basic building block for so much that we do, is actually Azure Policy. And Azure Policy is so incredibly powerful because what we can do with Azure Policy is really define in a very declarative way. I'm making a bold statement and saying, I want every resource that I deploy in my environment to look like X. And that X can be very customizable. I could do things like, as an example, maybe I say, hey, if anyone in my organization, wants to deploy a new VM, very common. Maybe they want a VM for development. Maybe they're building a new workload, whatever the case might be. Maybe I want to make certain that if it's connected to the internal network, it also doesn't have access. It can't be accessed externally with a public IP. So we can do things where we say, hey, this policy governs that and says, if you're connected to the internal network, maybe you don't get an external IP. Or another example, maybe I've got a storage account, right? And in that storage account, I say, as an enterprise standard and very common, I want to make sure that people only access the storage account with HTTPS, right? We want to make sure it's an encrypted session to that storage account. You can set a policy that says, hey, I want to ensure that this account, when it's deployed, has HTTPS enabled, but has HTTP, clear text, disabled. And so what's really cool about that is you can start to build these. I always kind of make the reference, maybe kind of guardrail-esque. We can kind of put these controls in place that help our users do the right thing. They simply won't be able to deploy these resources in a non-compliant way. So pretty powerful stuff. The second one that I think actually helps a ton is really kind of this idea of Azure Blueprints. And these are relatively newer, I would say. Probably over the past 12 to 18 months, we've had these out. But what's really cool about Azure Blueprints is we often hear, hey, I don't even know where to start to build a PCI DSS v3 compliant environment, or I need to have a FedRAMP moderate environment. Microsoft, can you help me? And the answer is absolutely yes. And that's where these blueprints come into play. So what a blueprint is it's a collection of artifacts that we've packaged up kind of as an accelerator to your path to a specific end state. And these artifacts consist of a variety of things. So one of them, there'll be Azure Resource Manager templates to actually define what the environment looks like. There'll be RBAC models so that, maybe we have some least privileged or separation of duties taken into account. And there'll be other artifacts that are part of that. And what's really great about these is you can deploy them. They're kind of pre-made in some ways, but they rapidly accelerate what it takes to get your environment up to speed for, again, PCI DSS, NIST 853, FedRAMP, whatever the case may be. I think we have about 20 of them out there to meet some of these really kind of foundational compliance, industry compliance requirements.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds amazing, Heath. Having the ability to both set a policy based on organization's requirements, but also having guidance through blueprints seems like it would make life much easier, especially like, organizations are creating these things. There might be something missed, or there might be a best practices thing that Microsoft can help with. Can you share your screen and show us what this process would look like? Because, seeing is believing.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me share my screen here real quick. And I'm going to share this screen. So we should be able to see, hopefully, my Azure portal. So real quick, I'm actually looking at my policy definitions now. And there's a ton we can do here. So for the sake of time, this deserves an hour unto itself. We kind of start to get the feel for this. This is where I can manage my Azure policy. Backing this up, what's really great about policy is you can use policy to govern, all subscriptions in an organization. You can use it to manage specific subscriptions. You can drill down and tag it to specific resource groups. So we can be super duper granular in how we assign these policies. You'll see I've got some of them listed here. I'm going to show us some other ways to kind of get a glance at this data a little later on. But if we go to the policy definitions here, we can actually see there's a number of great things that are out here, and this is just a quick nickel tour, I think, of what it looks like. But we're doing some pretty cool stuff. You'll see, and I don't want to necessarily give away too much here. We're going to come back to these, but these policy definitions are basically that grouping of kind of think of them as like configuration items for my environment that I want to map and measure against for any given compliance or security need that I might have. And so we see things out here. Most of these are built in, but things like audit machines with insecure password settings, maybe make sure that we have monitoring turned on in Azure Security Center. We can actually drill into each of these, and we'll actually be able to see the policy definition itself for any of these given items. Now, one really cool thing, and this is still in preview as far as I know, you're going to see this category of guest definition. So historically, where we've been with these policy settings is they very much govern kind of the core of Azure, if you will. When I deploy a VM, I want it to look like X, as Azure can see it as the hosting provider, if you will. What's really cool is this new guest configuration option. And what this allows me to do is actually kind of peek inside the OS and start to get some view over the actual workload itself. So we can do this on Linux, we can do it on Windows, but it allows me to use, and it's all PowerShell DSC based, but it allows me to say, hey, I want to go in and look at specific configurations within the operating system. That's what we're seeing here. We're actually going in and looking at, specific operating system configurations. So we can get super duper detailed on these and bubble that data up in a very, kind of manageable way, as we'll see a little bit later. So that's one piece of it. The second piece, we talked a little bit about blueprints. And again, we're just doing the nickel tour here, but definitely something to explore more. These are the Azure Blueprints. And again, these are, always in preview. But the view here is pretty straightforward. I can create blueprints. So we have, again, probably about, I think, 20 samples, give or take, that are out here. And you'll see some pretty heavy hitting ones if you're in a regulated industry. Obviously, PCI DSS, we've got HIPAA, FedRAMP moderate. I mean, my gosh, FedRAMP moderate, FedRAMP high. I mean, we want to talk about, just some great level of detail. We provide it when we start talking in terms of FedRAMP high and moderate. But these are the basic blueprints that we can deploy. And so, a couple things can happen here, and I can build my own. But what'll happen is I'll grab one of these, and I won't necessarily deploy it here live because I have to tie it to a subscription, and I only have one subscription, so it'll hold me back. But I give it a blueprint name. So in this case, I'm just going to throw something in here real quick. I'm going to select my subscription. I'm going to say, hey, this is kind of the default location. I'm just doing this to show you what the next set of controls look like. So I'm going to grab my subscription. And then it's going to show me the artifacts that are present as part of this blueprint. And I can go in and define this. I can tweak and tune. in a way that makes sense for my organization. But then it's available for me to deploy, and it drives many of the configuration settings that rapidly enable that environment to kind of line up with whatever framework you might be you might have specified previously, whether that's 853, HIPAA, whatever the case might be. So that's a real quick demo, I think, of Azure Policy and Azure Blueprints. Again, there's a ton more to these, and it's definitely worthwhile to check out. There's 2 shortcuts I think we called out in the slide deck there that I think we'll put some links on the screen maybe, but aka.ms/Azure Policy takes you straight to the documentation and some quick start guides, and then aka.ms/Azure Blueprints will take you right to the landing page for Azure Blueprints, give you a good list, walk through each. One of the really cool things I didn't call out, and I don't show it here, is that for most of the blueprints that are out there, we actually have a control mapping. And so it's a spreadsheet that you can download, and it actually says, hey, if you want to do X, here's the control mapping. And it's actually a really great document, Excel spreadsheet, really great document that even if you don't directly use the blueprint, phenomenal way to say, hey, I can do X, Y, and Z. Here's how I could do it. But another kind of hidden gem, if you will, I think in Azure Blueprints is that control mapping spreadsheet that's part of it.
Heath, I mean, this stuff is amazing, right? I love, how you demonstrated here Azure Policy and Blueprints. These really give our customers, you said it earlier, right? It's the enabler to the cloud, and it's accelerating that because, traditionally customers had to manage this in kind of a manual way. And, these regulations, like, I talked about earlier, are changing constantly as well. And, we're keeping up to date with kind of mapping these. And we talked about the control mappings and being able to export them as well, really kind of giving that definition. And these are almost like, bumpers when bowling, right? Like I think when customers go in and, they want to go and create a VM, but they don't want to make it, enable a public IP address, this can ensure that as they go and deploy it, those guardrails or the bumpers in bowling are really kind of making sure that customer is doing, or the person that's creating that resource is doing it in the right way.
Exactly. I love the bumpers and bowling analogy. The thing about this is that, hey, very much like the bumpers in bowling, they'll make sure I don't necessarily get a gutter, the thing that I know I don't want, but they won't necessarily ensure that I get a strike every time, but they certainly increase my odds of success every time I go out and, I guess in this case, bowl. But yeah, great analogy there, Johansson.
Yeah, so how do our financial services organizations take this further? How can they report on the folks, making sure that they're doing the right thing?
Yeah, so this is a really exciting area. One that I don't know that it necessarily gets as much credit or attention probably as it should, but that's a really critical function of what we call Azure Security Center. And for us, there's that's one of the many roles that it can fulfill. And Azure Security Center is kind of this big platform, if you will, of just security goodness, for lack of better words. It can play a couple of really key roles for an organization, as a cloud security posture management, I think is how some of the industry analysts define it, or maybe as a cloud workload protection platform, another way that a lot of the analysts out there define it. And we can kind of think of it in really 2 ways. I think Azure Security Center brings both kind of the preventative and detect. I'm sorry, let me back that up. I think we can think about it in the context that Azure Security Center really brings both kind of this helping me identify what my world around me looks like, some of those detective controls when things aren't necessarily right. But then it can also bring some really cool preventative controls, to help knock down and mitigate common threats. And maybe one of those early places that we see most customers start, I think, is really around helping them map their compliance journey. And Azure Security Center has a great role to play here. So maybe I show that real quick. What do y'all think?
Yeah, I would love to see it in action.
All right, sounds good. So let me fire up Security Center here, and we'll go take a quick peek. So this is Azure Security Center, and you're going to see some things that pop up. And you're going to see right off the bat, it actually provides just an incredible amount of insight for me. You're going to see 2 things that we're going to talk about today, by the way. The first is my overall secure score. And we're going to drill in. I'll spend a few minutes on this. The first piece I want to start with, though, is kind of our regulatory compliance. And there's actually a node here in the portal that you can go spend some time with where you can drill down and get a quick peek. And again, this is going to build on top of the policy work that we talked about, maybe using those blueprints. It takes it into account. But you can see at a pretty quick glance, I actually get a really great view of kind of our, a quick view of the status of the environment in terms of many of these popular kind of control sets. So if we scroll down, it actually drills in quite well for me. You can see I've got a number of these already added. We've got the Internet for Information, Internet Security, CIS, their baseline. PCI DSS, we've got a baseline for them. NIST 800, kind of the perennial 853, so we can drill in and take a peek. And what's really cool is, we map to those frameworks. So in the terms and kind of structure of the framework, we actually define, hey, what we are doing, what we're not doing, what we can measure, what we can't measure, and we call that out pretty clearly. So you'll see that, hey, based upon whether or not we're maybe meeting a specific control, we'll highlight red, we'll highlight green, and then there's some gray ones out here. And these gray ones are just things that we can't measure. They're generally more like process or people driven. In some cases, it's technology that we can't measure here. But where we can, we will absolutely tell you that, hey, maybe for role-based schemes, we've got something defined, and I'll tell you exactly how we're mapping that to the resources that are in that subscription. And in my case, I can drill in. We can see, hey, I don't have anybody in a failed status here. That's probably not a great one to show, but maybe I don't have anyone in a failed status here, and I can drill in and I get a pretty good view about that particular control. It'll tell me if I have any unhealthy resources. It would tell me if I have any healthy resources. It'll tell me, actually, and this is really great stuff, there's some really good content here in generally the remediation steps that tell me how to fix it. And then oftentimes we may give you an automatic remediation, so we may give you an automatic remediation in some cases, or otherwise we can actually let you trigger that with a logic app, something you do all the time. You can go out and fix this. One thing I'll call out, this is actually kind of new, and I love this view, but it actually tells me how often this data is updated. Because I don't know about y'all, I know when we make changes in some of our services, I may go out, change something on something and say, a portal's not reflecting that. It's always good to know how often it's going to update. So that's one piece to it. With the compliance view, I'm going to drop back to that real quick. One other thing I'll call out, you can also define your own baselines. And this is a really important distinction. So when we think about compliance, oftentimes it's not just, cut and dry, hey, I do X. There's a number of other controls that I may want to measure alongside it. And that's where I can define my own baselines. I can define my own kind of frameworks, if you will. And in these, I build on top of the policy definitions. I can use those guest configs, et cetera, to really drive an accurate representation of my resources against my own internal requirements. So that's some pretty cool stuff there.
Yeah, so Heath, I mean, that seems like a huge enabler for regulated customers to help manage their own internal compliance, right? It's not like us telling them, it's some guidelines, these are some best practices, now they can manage their own as well. Now, as we all know, just being compliant doesn't always make you secure. What else can we do? Do we show customers their security posture as well?
We sure do, and I know we're probably getting we're close on time, so I'll try and keep this brief. But that's where I think this idea of Secure Score really comes into play. And Secure Score, you're going to hear this across Microsoft. We've been doing this for a while in many places, but this is where we make proactive recommendations to our customers on, kind of optimal security configurations, if you will. And we've gamified it to an extent. It helps drive some good behaviors, we think, out of folks to see, hey, I could do better. Well, let me show you what it looks like. In this case, we're saying in my environment, I've got an overall secure score of 64%. Now I can up that. This is just a demo tenant. I could go in and take a peek at that and actually view the recommendations that maybe might make me more secure, right? Things that maybe I'm not seeing, things that I'm not aware of. We talked about those, that it's not necessarily, that the cloud isn't necessarily insecure. It's different, right? We have to think about it different. This is one way we help highlight some of that information. So, from the Secure Score view, we're actually making security recommendations that are pretty powerful, right? I might have, if I just pull into a couple examples here, in this case, it's highlighting remediate vulnerabilities. And in this case, it's saying a vulnerability assessment solution should be enabled on all your VMs. And you'll notice we have that quick fix button, which I think is awesome. One click of the button, it takes me right to the remediation page. I can be off to the races fixing anything that may be out here. But the important part of this is it's actually telling me that I have a potential score increase. And, like all things, we definitely want you to be as high as you possibly can. We feel there are certain things maybe you can't enable. And we give you some provisions for that. You can opt out of these. But you can see pretty quickly, it helps me kind of stack rank, if you will, what has the most, if I have 30 minutes to invest in raising my security posture, where do I want to focus my time? I'm going to start at the top of this list. I'm going to start working through it. And this does a really good job of surfacing up that data so that you can, keep on top of it. We'll introduce new features, new checks here on a regular basis. That's part of that security innovation. So, there's kind of this constant upward trend is what we're looking for out of folks.
This is, amazing, right? I think the ability for you to go in as a customer and see each item and see how you can remediate it and see the status, and then even potentially export this and use it to drive other workflow functionality, and then these quick fixes. Just down there under the unhealthy resources is actually telling you 2 out of the 3 VMs or servers have an issue, and you can, quickly click one button and it now addresses all of those issues for you. I think that's really powerful. What else can we do? I know we are short on time, but any new functionality that's been recently released?
Yeah, this one's super cool, and I'm gonna call to it just for a minute. We actually have a big banner because it's so powerful. But now we have a Secure Score API, and this is really awesome for customers because, admittedly, most customer security operations centers, those folks aren't coming in here and checking this on a regular basis. They're usually working out of their SIM. They've got a view of the world that they're working from. It's generally not this as their primary view. So what the Secure Score API allows us to do is actually ingest that data into the views that they use so that we can surface up any of these changes in a very, low latency kind of manner. We're able to say, hey, this changed, you should be aware of it, go take action, drive a remediation, etc. And again, we talk about the freshness. So these items, they have varying windows around them, but the ability to put that in front of an analyst very quickly and say, hey, we need to, or crack a ticket, whatever the case might be, for someone to go fix it, that helps, especially in the age where we see, misconfigurations drive a lot of those cloud security incidents that we hear about. It's not necessarily an O-Day or something crazy. Oftentimes it's just it's a misconfiguration, and this can help really address that.
No, this is, fascinating, Heath. Thanks for this, really amazing session. We learned so much today around how the threat landscape is changing. We discussed how the cloud, we have a shared responsibility model that can be, both helpful and advantageous for keeping our customers up to date with what's going on, and ensuring adherence to compliance and security policies. And then the stuff we talked about with Azure Policy. If you're interested in starting this journey, or if you're in the middle of it, and would like some guidance, feel free to reach out to your Microsoft account team. We can schedule some time, schedule an envisioning session. Really great stuff here, Heath. And thank you very much for sharing this with our audience.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Awesome job. And thanks for the recap, Johansson. Let's go ahead and take some Q&A. We do have a bunch of questions here. The question number 1, so Marlon mentioned, you've talked a lot about Windows. Are there any other non-MS Microsoft workloads?
Yeah, so we can take a lot of these abilities, and this is kind of a nuanced question, so I'll be a little careful in how I answer it. The documentation has some great details, but definitely, Microsoft's view of the world is, hey, we recognize customers run heterogeneous environments. It's not just Microsoft stuff that we're talking about here. In many cases, we can bring some of these capabilities back on-prem. If you have on-prem services, in many cases, we can take them out to other clouds even. So there's a lot of value here, even if you're not just doing everything in Azure. I would recommend you take a peek at Azure Security Center.
We got another question here in the chat window. Is where can customers go to learn more about these capabilities?
Yeah, so there's a couple of places, and we'll post some links afterwards. I would say, our documentation actually does a great job, and shouts out to the doc writers out there. They do some great work around providing these quick starts. And we have this for Windows VMs and Linux VMs, and hey, for monitoring Azure subscriptions, I would encourage us all to go take a peek at those Azure docs. We'll post a link to them. But in those documents, you'll find very clear, tested step-by-step instructions to go out and take a peek at this and enable it in your environment. Some of this is on, you just have to go take a peek. So that's a great place to start.
Great. Heath, we have another question from Anonymous. The policies can be applied to an existing environment, but what happens when you deploy a blueprint to an existing subscription with an existing conflicting resource?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different things that can happen there, and it comes down to the individual settings. So I'll be careful in how I talk about that. In some cases, you can set them to overwrite, audit, block, but those configuration settings do have ways that you could go out, you could put them in audit mode and get a view for what might break. Generally, it is a declarative thing, so those things will be non-compliant. They'll show, and then it just depends on what you've set for each of those policy definitions, what the next steps would be.
I've got another.
So I guess the answer is sorry. I guess the recap answer is it depends.
All right, great. Heath, we got another question in the chat window. This one's coming from Jamie. Is this all or nothing? Do I have to turn this on for everything that I have inside of Azure, or can I do this kind of more isolated?
Yeah, so some of these things, and this is kind of a complex one because there is, always a cost to some of this. It depends on what you're doing. Again, you can get really granular though, in defining which workloads you want to monitor, which resource groups you want to monitor, what subscriptions you want to monitor. There's a lot of flexibility in how you enable this across your digital estate.
Great. So it looks like we are running out of time. So thanks again for your time, Heath. Learned a lot. And thanks again for those attending via YouTube or watching live and asking questions. If you haven't already, be sure to register for FSI notifications and invites by visiting aka.ms/FSI Fridays. We're also open to constructive feedback, so please send us your comments and suggestions at aka.ms/FSI Fridays feedback. Be sure to catch the recordings of our previous sessions on our FSI Fridays YouTube channel, aka.ms/FSI recap, where you can also post any of the follow-up questions that weren't covered today. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and also a quick shout out to our video producer, Alan Mock, who has been making sure these live webcasts have been running smoothly in the background for the last 12 sessions. So thank you, Alan. So Johansson, we are entering the rest of Security September. Why don't you give us a preview of what's to come?
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to the rest of Security September. Next week on September 18th, we'll be speaking with Steve Fall, who's going to talk to us about modernizing the security operations, a really exciting and relevant topic for our financial services customers. And then on September 25th, we're joined by Jason Cohen, where he's going to talk about managing and patching and updating. And oh my, how Microsoft is managing these machines for customers now. It's a really exciting topic, and he's a really great speaker. You won't want to miss it. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time on FSI Fridays.